Ha trabajado en master plan urbano y en proyectos sociales en el oeste de Europa, en Rusia y en Oriente Medio. Como design thinker ha participado en múltiples contextos de diseño, imaginando nuevas formas de infraestructura social con una visión holística. Ha colaborado en soluciones que combinan entornos, ciudadanos y servicios públicos. Ha trabajado con FutureGov, con foco en los gobiernos locales, para crear innovación social en el Reino Unido en áreas como la atención social, la vivienda y la estrategia. Donagh combina conocimiento de diseño y tecnología para contribuir al desarrollo de productos digitales centrados en los usuarios. Es arquitecto graduado en la London Metropolitan University y máster en diseño de servicios de la University of the Arts de Londres. Así que con ustedes, Donagh.
Bueno, con eso. Disculpa, pero hace solamente como 4 meses acá y como tengo castellano de 4 meses. Si quieres puedo como presentar en inglés, pero si no hay mucha gente que pueden como comprender, voy a como...
¿Prefieren que hable en inglés o en inglés? ¿Hay alguien que no puede entender el inglés y lo dejaríamos afuera si habla en inglés?
Inglés tranquilo.
Inglés tranquilo. Bueno, hay como texto que es un poquito, no sé, académico, pero vamos a ver. Y si hay preguntas, pregúntame como directo, como en el momento, ¿sí? Okay, so the name of my presentation is Architecture is Dead, Long Live Architecture. And hopefully you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about as the presentation goes on. So, to start, I'm going to speak about some of the contributing factors to the decline of traditional built environment architecture.
Hey, Donagh.
Sí.
They say slowly.
Okay. Since 2008, there has been a 40% reduction in demand for architects' services in the UK and a finite market worldwide. Climate change is provoking new attitudes toward waste and our natural resources. The very idea of producing new building solutions is itself unsustainable, especially given the amount of unoccupied space and the economic conditions which we live in at the moment worldwide. Based on statistics from the USA, a 2,000 square foot wide house produces 127 tons of demolition debris. So the idea is that we have a lot of resources already, recursos in el mundo, and why do we need to be continuing to build physical architecture? This project that you see beside is a project that we did with FutureGov in a place called Surrey in London, and this is a resource map where all the citizens came and mapped resources that were common to them in their area to collect them. Okay. So where are we going? A shifting context of changing demographics and centres of power is resulting in new power structures, decentralisation of markets, and economic power worldwide. So we don't any longer have the same kind of protagonists like the USA dominating or Great Britain dominating financial scenes. There are new players coming in. The whole world is changing. Equally, this has an effect on architecture. Big clients are moving towards one-stop shop global providers. So that's big companies like ADAS, etc., who do everything, which means that the profession is splintering into niche disciplines where people are doing technical jobs and professions. Detailed design is increasingly coming through the supply chain, which means that things are being outsourced to places like India and China, and the increasing complexity of building technology, so the materials that we're using to build, means that architects cannot be expected to know everything in the way that they were before, and the way they certainly think they do now still, but they don't. So, as architects, we've made our bed, and now we have to lie in it. The business model of architecture is still a mess. Most architects are poorly paid, work long hours to impossibly tight margins. US-based research recently found that architecture graduates have the highest rates of unemployment of all graduates, which is common worldwide. And there's a problem. The problem is the separation between what architects want to do and the reality of the market that's available. This is a project which is quite interesting, which is kind of anti-market, and it's called Canning Town Caravanserai, and it's built in. It's a prototype for a new kind of village market next to the Olympic site in London, and all of it is prototyped on site. So essentially everything that they think is needed for the community is prototyped on site, be it service or physical space. So if there's such a problem, where can we go from here as architects? I'm going to show some examples of some cool things that architects are doing, and then explain some cool things that information architects are doing, and then see if we can mix the two, come up with something new. So this is a project called the Wiki House by a company called 00 in London. And what it is it's an open source kit house. Designs are uploaded onto the Wiki House website, and anyone can download a Wiki House and print it out on a cutting machine. It also means that as architects we're needing to engage more with the public to get work. So as I said, that there was a gap between what architects want to do and what the market wants. In order to I suppose, bring this gap closer, we need to engage more with people in the same way as technologists from information architecture are doing, and actually talk to users about what they want. This is a project that I was involved with Pi Architecture in Jerusalem, designing a new community in East Jerusalem, and one of the first things we did was make an experiential mapping. So map the experiencia, which is going on a one-to-one scale with the site that you are, and mapping every single detail and how people feel and all of that jazz. So let's think about what happens in the city. Architecture traditionally only focuses on buildings, but there's a lot more that happens. And that's essentially why I left architecture and now work more in service design. So if we imagine built environment and physical buildings to be hard infrastructure, then services and technologies and everything that is offered by the city within that is soft infrastructure. This is a project that I did for a city called Wolverhampton in the UK, which was the centre of the Industrial Revolution, and now is a complete mess. It's one of the poorest, has an incredibly bad identity, and the citizens that live there really, really undervalue their place. So what we did was we made this hybrid of a hack day and a TEDx over 2 days to try to get the city to envisage new services in the areas of assets, that's built environment, people, that's services, and making, which is about making new things and getting manufacture going, whether it's digital manufacture or physical manufacture, again, in that city. So long live architecture. The modern world of technology and innovation, the techie world, means that there are new areas for application of architecture. Dan Hill agrees that the isolation of architecture from collaborating on new visions has often been its own limited worldview and arrogance. So that means that architecture and the discipline of architecture has been isolated from society by the fact that architects are up their own arse and completely arrogant. The architect's position as a thought leader in decision-making for communities and cities has been replaced by emerging professions who've embraced innovation and their democratic participation in their work. Liam Young rightly suggests that if architects want to continue to set the agenda for builders and city makers, they must earn that right, and that means by engaging with citizens. New networks need new kinds of architects. So this is a map of occupied movements across the world. I couldn't fit in the whole world, but I got Ireland in and some other places. There has been a move from the community sociality of physically localized connections to increase network sociality. So we've heard all this morning, of informational, ephemeral, and often temporary associations. So básicamente, la como sociedad physical ahora es como sociedad de redes como sociales y otras cosas. Further to these classifications, global capitalism can be said to have created identities of resistance. So as a society around the world, we are becoming more and more resistant to the traditional kind of capitalist top-down model of development. What are the limits of information architecture? So information architecture is the art and science of organizing and labeling websites, internets, online communities, and software to support usability. Or is it more than that? As the impact and reach of what we define as the internet grows and penetrates further and further into our real lives and real space, what new meanings does it take? So, what more can information architecture add to the mix? Certainly it can make use of data that's existing within cities. These are two different types of data mappings. One is a graph, but it's also a geographic mapping showing developments in London between, I think, 2001 and 2011. That big part of the graph is the Olympic Park. On the other side, this is a mapping made by Autodesk, the great creators of AutoCAD, mapping their organization, so their actual business and their employees. This is a mapping of energy use from New York City. And this is a really interesting mapping which maps casualties in Afghanistan with the Americans and maps them against the places where they come from, their home places. So information architecture can be incredibly political, and it can tell much more stories and contribute to much more about what we're thinking about the development of cities. It can be political to the point that in a very, very short space of time, like this image, you can map something that is very, very difficult to otherwise show. So on the right, this is an image which it's about fear and immigration. I think it might come from Holland, and it shows proportions of attitudes to refugees and immigrants. On the other side, this is a mapping which shows economic, so the money in your pocket, median household income, according to locality in Washington, D.C. Information architecture can also contribute to creating a new dialogue between citizens and providers. This is a product called Fix My Street. I don't know if you've come across it before. What it is, I think that there might be something similar here in development if it's not already here. If you are walking down the street and if you see a pothole or something wrong, you put it in there, the local authority will send you an email to say, yes, we've seen your picture, and then when they fixed it, they'll send you one back and say, all fixed. This is a mapping from Buenos Aires, which is a really interesting project, La Vida en DC, and part of the bike storming activism group, which is for cyclists who live here in Buenos Aires, to tell them which routes are the best ones to travel, where you have which ones are difficult and which places to avoid. That's a collaborative map here. So as I said, architecture is dead. Traditional architecture needs to move with the times and needs to involve itself in new conversations. And we can do that in many ways. Basically, through strategic engagement with diverse groups and stakeholders, we can stay relevant. Wouter van der Spoot has demonstrated a 100% correlation between Corbusian-inspired blocks and social unrest, such as rioting in Paris and London. Past attempts by architects to impose an order on social organisation have failed. So this guy from Holland has done a lot of research to be able to show a direct relationship between the architecture of social housing in Paris and London and riots in those areas, in those ghettos. So architects are responsible directly for some civic problems that exist in our society today. Deeper strategic decision making and public service design is not something that architects have much experience with. They're mainly perceived at working to create buildings and urban spaces. Yet buildings are not why cities exist, they're simply a side effect of cities. Architecture's core aim may still be the application of spatial intelligence, but if that outcome is not seen as valuable to the wider culture and wider society, then it doesn't solve problems. If architecture cannot demonstrate its value to wider society, it is not relevant, I should say, to those who are not architects. So it is irrelevant, sorry, to those who are not architects. So if architects can't prove that they're making buildings that are not simply for architects, which is generally the case, architects make architecture for architects, then they'll become increasingly more irrelevant and eventually die out as a profession, as information architects and new types of professions take over. So how can we use the process of architecture to solve core problems in modern society beyond solutions that are simply buildings? In the future, vertical distinctions between design disciplines derived from craft practices will become less important. So ahora tenemos como distinciones entre todos de las profesiones en diseño, pero ellos son de la pasada de cuando era como craft practices. a new kind of consistent design practice performed by strategic generalists, cultural inventors, and multidisciplinary designers, which we seem to have a lot of here, will directly disrupt change. Through both designing and engaging with new spaces for social interaction, such as networks and platforms, and by collaborating with others across these spaces, we can define a new path. So this is the company that I worked with just before I came over here to Buenos Aires, called FutureGov, and we're a social innovation consultancy based in London. And the kind of ethos behind FutureGov is that design with technology makes change. So if you see, hay como diseño con tecnología puede cambiar mucho. This, primarily the projects that we had were service projects, so making new public services and involving people in the design process in the same way that we heard about today, and I'll explain to you how. This is one of the last projects that I worked on, which is called Patchwork, and it's a tool that was made for multi-agency working in the context of social services. So imagine that I'm a teacher, and I have a child that comes into my class with a black eye. At the moment, I don't really have any way of informing anyone else that works with that child. Potentially that child has a social worker, has a doctor, has a sexual health worker, has numerous people working with them depending on how bad their situation is. This application was designed with frontline staff, so era como desarrollado con la gente que trabajan en la frente del servicio público. So people, that nurses and different type of social workers that were working in that thing. We brought them together, had several workshops, and made several iterations. Sent the kind of in the same way that agile development process works, that we've heard before this morning. What else? This is another project that FutureGov made. I wasn't personally involved in it, but it's a project that replaces Meals on Wheels. Yo no sé si existe un servicio acá para dar como comida a la gente que sí. So instead of this, this project is conceived as a social network and application that connects potentially kind of housewives and people who are cooking meals to an older person in their community, so they can provide them with a meal, therefore replacing the need for the state to perform this role, and helping social inclusion. So long live architecture. The modern world of technology and innovation means new areas for application of architecture. Bruce Meyer describes architecture as synthesis informed by democratic civic values, and that nothing is more important right now. So in the world that we live in at the moment, nothing is more important than creating democratic civic values for people. However, it is the strategic elements of solving problems based on real contextual evidence and ethnography and placemaking, whatever form that is, either real or virtual places, that is of value, and not the traditional view of architecture as a craft of constructing buildings. This is a project which is very interesting, you should check out, by Teddy Cruz on the border of the US and Mexico, which infills public space that can't be used to make roads because of the terrain, como la topografía como en la frontera es muy como esta, and they reclaim these public spaces to create new community assets. Liam Young states that reimagining architecture practice by going back to the drawing board would be a regression. Instead, the task should be to figure out next principles, which means thinking about a core set of design values across the whole design world, so that's everybody here, incorporating those used in user-centered design and information architecture. Traditional architecture practice will become even more meaningless to society until it embraces the many new disciplines that impact upon it. This includes agile development methodology, pioneered by information architecture, and engagement-led digital service design. Designers have almost an instinctive way to find out what this modern practice might be, and that is to prototype. So let's try. This is a really interesting project by a friend of mine in London a thesis project which is imagining the world that we're going to be increasingly going into. So we spoke a bit about information overload this morning, and I personally think that this is going to be an increasingly big problem as we move closer and closer to having more information, especially since studies in Korea and elsewhere have decided that there's major psychological impact on human development from information overload. This is a project imagining what our futures may be and how augmented reality, so that's how reality, la realidad intercambia para la tecnología y las cosas si serán como juntadas. There's another really interesting group you should look at in London called Berg, who have migrated again from architecture into information architecture. And they do a lot of work with the BBC, trying to help people understand things in the news to do with scale. So, for instance, when you have statistics that say 69% of X have a mortgage, for example, it uses your own social network to demonstrate some of these things. This is another really interesting project that comes from Berg, called the Little Printer or Berg Cloud, which is a physical little printer that prints out receipt kind of style pieces of information connected to various other sources. For instance, the Guardian newspaper, Google Docs, Google Calendar, and you can send yourself a message or print out some piece of information for you to, or a puzzle that you can do on your way to work instead of being glued perhaps to your tablet. So architecture is dead. By collaborating with other professions, we can make this social infrastructure of the future. Long live architecture. Are you ready for the challenge? So I'm coming up to the end, thankfully. According to Dan Hill, those selected from inside architecture are amongst those most likely to be capable of rewiring the practice from within. To take forward the idea of spatial intelligence and practice, forging new relationships and positions. Those drawn in from the other side offer the most interesting connectors or alternatives originating outside of architecture and free of its baggage, yet drawing from its history and practices when it's productive to do so. This is a project that we did with Google and FutureGov, coming up with new services for out-of-work young people, because in Europe there's an enormous problem. Obviously in Spain you have, and Greece, upwards of 50 to 60% youth unemployment. In Ireland we don't have as big a problem because everyone's gone. So we have 40% youth existing in Ireland. The building block of change. The profession is heading towards consultancy. Architects will have the greatest influence if they concentrate on high-end consultancy and strategic thinking. The world needs more collective, empathetic groups of architects and other design professionals. More collectives would give the profession a bigger impact. So I'm going to end with three kind of points from Indy Johar, who works with 00, who I showed the Wiki House, and who curate the Hub Westminster, which is a collaborative workspace where FutureGov and where I worked until coming here. So, as architects, our knowledge and IP, so I can't even remember what IP, intellectual property, ecology as a profession is fundamentally fragmented and isolated across thousands of small organizations where innovation is barely disseminated and usually buried. So, en arquitectura no hay colaboración, no existe. No está como una cosa como inherent in architectura. But imagine a platform for sharing our individual knowledge where practitioners are encouraged to share IP under Creative Commons licenses. So imagine if we could, as architects, either information architects or traditional architects, collaborate on new methodology somewhere. The purpose of the title of an architect is not to build a castle around a profession and to keep people out, but to be a lighthouse to attract, interrogate and advocate the best talent, ideas and practice. So this is more because in Europe there's been traditional architects feel very, I suppose, impeded upon by information architects, and therefore the title of architect is protected in Europe, which is complete nonsense. Imagine a true content aggregator of knowledge and practice leading the propositional debate for the progressive evolution of our cities, towns and villages. So we are in a new world where social frameworks and the modes and methods of people organising themselves are revolutionised. Imagine a profession in the age of social media, crowdsourcing, personalised budgets, wiki policy responses, Facebook, TEDx for a new learning movement. We can make our own work. This is a friend of mine, a project that they had in London. Obviously, because no architects have work, they set up a market stall in a market and did direct engagement, had essentially a pop-up consultancy on the street with people, trying to bridge that gap between architects and society. Can we make a bigger impact with less resource? This is a project of a friend of mine that is here in Saavedra, Muy cerca de Parque de Saavedra, which shows how easy it is to regenerate space without pumping loads and loads of resources into it. And we can do much more with technology and with the ideas that you guys have. There's some people that you should look at, and that's the end.